You would think that since we have had renders of the Galaxy Z Fold 7 since all the way back in February, we would have a pretty good idea of exactly how big this inner display was going to be. But strangely enough, all the way now into June, probably less than a month or right around a month away from this device's launch, we still do not seem to have consensus on this inner screen size. Now, let me be the first to tell you that the gap between the high end and the low end in these rumors is about 0.2 of an inch. And in the grand scheme of things, that really isn't going to matter a whole heck of a lot. But I suspect that if you're here watching this video on this channel, you might just be nerdy enough to care about 0.2 of an inch. And one reason is because if it's 8 inches, that puts it right in the same range as a lot of folding phones like the Pixel 9 Pro Fold. But if it's 8.2 inches, well, now it's actually bigger than things like the Oppo Find N5. And that might kind of take it an extra couple of steps towards this device being the Ultra device that Samsung seemed to tease that they wanted it to be. What did they say in their little blog post where they talked about the next folding phones being Ultra? They said users are asking for bigger screens in addition to some other things. So one way to really be able to say this Z Fold 7 is the most Ultra Z Fold we've made is if they can say it's got the biggest inner screen of any of these folding phones. So we have disagreement on this front. Let's dig into this. Who is saying what? And luckily, all of this is kind of condensed down into one quick thread on Twitter, which is what you're seeing right now. Sam Mobile tweeted this. Samsung confirms the Galaxy Z Fold 7 will bring bigger cover and foldable displays. And Ross Young went ahead and responded to this. Ross is someone who is an insider in the display world, so they tend to know these things. He says, confirmed at 8 inches and then 6.49 inches for the cover display, same as the Z Fold 6 SE. Now, I actually have a problem with this prediction. I don't see how that could possibly be the case. What you are seeing here right now is the Galaxy Z Fold 7's render measurements and the Galaxy Z Fold 6 Special Edition, which is in green, the 7 is in red. You can tell the difference because one is quite a bit thinner than the other. And when you look at these two, what you're going to find is that they are essentially identically sized, which you might say, well, Shane, doesn't that, of course, then indicate that the screen sizes would be the same? Well, no, because they're not exactly identical. The Z Fold 7 is going to be just a little bit taller. We're talking about like, fractions of millimeters, but it is taller. And it is also just a little bit wider. That's harder to show because it's a very, very small amount of space, but it is ever so slightly larger. But it's not just that. There have also been reports from Ice Universe. If we scroll down here, he says the Galaxy Z Fold 7's inner screen bezel is narrow. The width of the bezel on the Z Fold 6 is 1.9 millimeters. On the Fold 7, it is closer to 1 millimeter. So we have shaved off almost a full millimeter from the bezel. So it's wider, it's taller, and the bezel is smaller. So how could the inner screen size remain the same? This does not make any logical sense. Now, you would think that you could just take something like the Galaxy Z Fold 6, and we, just had this said that the bezel was about 1.9 millimeters wide, and we know its dimensions, and we know what we think the 7's dimensions are going to be. You could just do all of this math and come up with an answer, but the problem is, the bezel's not really 1.9 millimeters. The black part is about 1.9 millimeters, but the actual space between the edge of the screen and the edge of the device is larger than that, and I don't really think we have good information on exactly what that distance is going to be truly on the Galaxy Z Fold 7. And when you're talking about, little fractions of millimeters versus fractions of inches, these numbers do add up and you end up with this gap where we really just don't have a great answer on the size of this screen. Now, because of this, back in May when I wrote this article, I told you guys that my assumption is that the Galaxy Z Fold 7 might indeed have an inner screen that is ever so slightly larger than 8 inches. But I said that there was disagreement. We've only looked at one person's opinion. Let's look at more. Haskell J here said, I wonder why OnLeaks said it's more than 8 inches. OnLeaks, who actually supplied those initial renders, grabbed their renders and used this measuring tool, and they came up with 8.18 inches. Now, I'm not familiar with this software, so we have a couple of questions, or at least I do. Maybe you guys have an answer to this. When you're looking at a measurement like this, does the measurement end at the beginning of this circle, like right here? Or is he measuring halfway into the bezel? I have no idea. I would assume that OnLeaks would know better than to measure halfway into the bezel. But that did look a little bit weird to me. Maybe you guys can clear that up. But he's measuring it at 8.18 inches. That's obviously quite a bit larger than what Ross Young was saying. But we do have a caveat here. OnLeaks replied to himself and said these are freehand measurements and therefore they are always rough figures. Honestly, does 0.18 inches really make a difference? Like I said in the beginning, no, it really doesn't. But still, you know, it's a diagonal measurement, but the diagonal should be the widest, the longest measurement that you can get on this device. If you measure from diagonal to slightly off from diagonal, wouldn't that make it shorter? At any rate, this does point towards it possibly being larger than that. And then in this same thread, someone tagged Panda Flash Pro, and they kind of quote tweeted themselves there. Finally, it's confirmed now. Galaxy Z Fold 7 display is the same size as the Z Fold 6 Special Edition at 8 inches, with slightly less bezels, resulting in nearly 8.2 inch display. So that kind of also is agreeing with what OnLeaks measurement is saying, and I think kind of agreeing more closely to just logically what it would have to be given the size of the device and the size of the bezels. I wish that this was a video like the one I posted a while back where I feel like we pretty definitively put to bed the disagreement between Ice Universe and OnLeaks regarding the thickness of the Fold 7. Being able to measure how much that bezel protrudes and then realizing that the measurements are both correct, it just depending on what you're measuring. Are you measuring with the bezel or not with the bezel, as every OEM actually does do in their official measurements? This is not, unfortunately, a video like that. The conclusion that I am coming to is that even though Ross Young is a guy that is, you know, usually very, very highly reputable and easy to believe based on their track record, I just don't see how 8 inches could possibly be true. Good news is, I think that we can just assume broadly that the Z Fold 7 screens are going to be larger than the screens of the Z Fold 6. The cover display and the inner display, they're both getting larger. And I think that that's probably a good thing considering everyone else is bigger than them at this point. If you want to talk about, you know, throwing around the word ultra, you got to do that. My guess, somewhere between 8.1 and 8.2 inches is where we're going to be, and either one of those should put it right there in the range of any of the biggest inner screen folding phones on the market. And again, I think that that's something that Samsung just really had no choice but to do at this point. Guys, let me know what you think about all this in those comments down below. Are you excited that the Z Fold is finally getting larger and competing more directly with the Pixel 9 Pro Fold, the Oppo Find N5, all of these other even larger inner screen folding devices? Again, drop that comment down below. Subscribe for more content like this, and until next time, stay nerdy, my friends.